All right, joining us now as we remember the late, great John Madden. Of course, the biggest news in the sports world since last night is the Godfather of VSiN, one Brent Musburger, also the voice of the Las Vegas Raiders. Brent, we really appreciate you joining us here on My Guys in the Desert. Obviously wish it was on more happy terms here, but we wanted to get your thoughts here on the late, great John Madden. First of all, before we get into anything, just how can you put into words the impact John Madden had on the game of football?
Yeah, there are very few people who had the kind of impact that John had on the history of the National Football League. And I've given it a lot of thought and talked to some reporters around the country. And, you know, John really had three viable careers involving the National Football League. We start, of course, with his tenure as a head coach of the then Oakland Raiders. It's sort of interesting because there was a theory out, because writers have to have some reason for teams losing, that John Madden couldn't lose because he just couldn't win the big one. Could not win the big one. That was what they were harping on in the New York tabloids at the time. And, of course, now as we look back on it, we realize that the Raiders were the second best team in the NFL, and the first and best team was either the Miami Dolphins or the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they would eliminate the Raiders. But finally, Big John and Ken Stabler broke through, won that big Super Bowl out in the Rose Bowl, and still brings a smile to my face every time I think about how difficult it was for several of the Raider players to hoist John up in the air. and we see that picture as they're carrying him toward midfield. And the other picture that always amuses us about John is when he's on the sideline, he's always got his sideline pass attached to his belt, as though nobody would recognize him and they would deny him entry into a field. But there was Big John on the sideline wearing his pass. So then he was worn out and he didn't want to fly anymore. So he stepped away, and now we go to the second career. And here is where I really come to know John. He came to CBS, and I will tell you, he knew nothing, and I mean nothing, about broadcasting. He didn't know what a monitor was. He didn't have an idea of what a producer did or a director did. But it was very fortunate that in the early days at CBS, the head of it, Van Gordon Sauter, teamed him with a young, good, careful broadcaster by the name of Gary Bender out of Kansas. Basketball fans still remember he did our Final Four for several years. And that was so fortuitous for John. I'm not sure that he would have ever made it as a broadcaster without that relationship for a couple of seasons with Gary, because Gary really taught him how to operate up at a booth and when they were going to commercials and promos and the interrupt button. And John, of course, took it from there. Then about 10 of us at CBS, I'll never forget this, because we had a roster of play-by-play announcers that included the great Vince Scully, Pat Summerall, and on and on and on. And there was a discussion as to who they should then team John with, because after working with Gary, it was obvious that he was our number one analyst, and every one of our play-by-play guys wanted to work with him. Ed Hookstratton, who was the agent for Scully in Los Angeles, put a lot of pressure on Van to team Scully up with John. And it appeared that indeed was going to be the case, but there were several people in the production room who said, you know, listen, Scully's a Hall of Famer and whatever he wants to do, but I'm not sure that John will have enough room. Whereas if we team him with Summerall, he can do whatever he wants. Pat will give him the whole pasture. And that's exactly what happened. And they became, in my opinion, the best play-by-play team in the history of the National Football League. So that was career number two. And number three, of course, started. And youngsters today, they don't remember the coaching. They don't remember the broadcasting. But they certainly know the game, the Madden game, which became one of the most popular in history. There are so many anecdotes about working with John Madden back in the days at CBS. We finished a playoff game in Chicago, and of course, John didn't have really a fear of flying. He was claustrophobic. For example, we could never get him a hotel room above the third floor because he would not get in an elevator. So in those early days, before he got his famous bus, he would travel on the train all around the country. And I said, John, I don't want to see you travel alone back home after this playoff game. It's cold. I'll go with you on the train. So John and I start off from the Chicago station, and the thing breaks down, I think twice. We go to upstate New York, and they change engines, and we're stranded there overnight. And by the time we get to Grand Central Station, I don't know, 2 days later, I got off. I said, John, you're on your own, my friend. That's my last train trip from a football game. But he was the thing about John. He was such a good guy, and people would come up to him and talk to him, and John would always listen like, this person's the most important person I've ever met in my life. Everybody just enjoyed him, and he never, he never got carried away up in the booth. He was always entertaining, and everybody remembers boom, boom, and I'm very happy that he didn't get caught up in the statistical nerds that now rule so much of game coverage. That was never part of the John Madden era, and he lived a great life, full life, passing away at the age of 85. Had a great family, a couple of sons that were frequently around down in the studio days at CBS. They've grown up now, so it's a legendary career. But to your point, John Madden, probably Commissioner Pete Rozelle, George Halas. Those are the kind of names that made an enormous impact. And when John was a broadcaster, as he came away from the Raiders, that was the growth in the NFL. Broadcasting took off, and of course, we have to also credit Al Davis, because Al kept John on as a coach, even though they couldn't beat the Steelers, couldn't beat the Dolphins in those championship games. But Al saw something in John Madden, and Al Davis deserves an awful lot of credit too in the building of the John Madden that we all knew and loved so much.
Yeah, Brent. We're speaking with Brent Musburger here, legendary broadcaster, of course, the Godfather here at VSiN, and the voice of the Las Vegas Raiders. We got about a minute and a half left here, Brent. Just ultimately, what kind of legacy do you think John Madden left behind, and how will you ultimately remember him?
I suppose I'll remember him just for the stories that I told you and the impact he made on the NFL. But the younger generation, I really believe, will remember him more for the game than anything else. The Madden game comes out every year, and every year it seems like the players get more and more realistic. I'm not a game player myself, but I've watched people play the Madden game, and it's spectacular, and kids enjoy it. And that's how they'll remember John Madden, the younger generation. I mean, there's a whole lot of people out there that don't. When I say the name George Halas, they wonder, who's that? And he was one of the founders of the National Football League. No, he'll remain a legendary figure, and you can go see his bust in Canton anytime.